Hello everybody and welcome to my video in which I'm going to discuss the theory of planned behavior. Now, the theory of planned behavior arose out of what was a bit of a crisis for the field. Because in the late 60s, a meta-analysis came out revealing that one of the biggest topics of study, attitudes, weren't as good a predictor of behavior as up to that point we had thought. In fact, the correlation between behavior and attitudes tended to be fairly low. So out of that, in response to that meta-analysis, the field tried to identify times and situations when attitudes were predicted or did predict behavior. All right. So Aitken's theory of planned behavior came out of this effort. Now, Aitken's theory of planned behavior argued that attitudes predict behavior more or less depending upon at least two other variables. Those are perceived control and subjective normativity of the behavior. So let's put subjective normativity of the behavior to the side for a second, and let's talk about perceived control. So perceived control refers to the extent to which we believe that we have personal control over our behavior. All right? When that perceived control is high, attitudes are thought to predict behavior better. Okay, so let's pick an attitude that I have a positive attitude towards, or an attitude object that I have a positive attitude towards. Let's say pizza. Love it. All right, pretty much all of it, except for my wife's ham and pineapple pizza. With the I don't know. She loves it. I don't know what's wrong with her. Anyway, pizza, positive attitude. All right. Well, will I actually eat positive? Will I eat positive attitudes? Will I eat pizza? Well, if my perceived control is high, chances are, yeah, I will, because my attitude towards it is positive. And so when perceived control is high, attitudes predict behavior. If perceived control was low, however, the attitude probably wouldn't predict it. If I thought I was in an environment where other people had more control, had more say over things, it wasn't right for me to necessarily control things or exert my will or anything like that or something like that. If my perceived control was low, right? So let's say, choosing my food, let's say I lived in an environment where choosing what I ate wasn't really up to me, right? Or at least I didn't think it was up to me. Well, in that case, even though I have a positive view of pizza, a positive attitude towards pizza, chances are that that attitude is not going to predict whether I buy it or not. All right. But again, if I think that I have a lot of control over it, then again, yes, the attitude predicts the behavior. Now let's jump on over here to subjective normativity. Is the behavior subjectively normative? Meaning, does the average person do it? Is it acceptable in whatever environment you're in to engage in that behavior? So let's go back with eating pizza. I try to work out a lot, right? I go to the gym a lot, right? Well, among these individuals, eating pizza isn't the most normative thing to do, right? Because eating a lot of pizza is kind of antithetical to the goals that people have when those people are frequent the gym and work out a lot, right? So in that case, the subjective normativity of the behavior that my attitude's related to is low. So in that case, the attitude doesn't predict the behavior as well. So when the subjective normativity of the behavior is low, the attitude doesn't predict the behavior as well, right? But if the subjective normativity of the behavior is high and it's consistent with the attitude, then the attitude predicts the behavior. So if I was with my wife who loves pizza in every form and has told me multiple times that she would eat pizza every day of the week if she could, all right, with her, then the subjective normativity of eating pizza is high, right? So my attitude towards pizza will predict my behavior better. I'm probably going to eat it because I have a positive attitude. Now, if we flip this the other way, if I have a negative attitude, again, what matters is whether the subjective normativity of the behavior is normative, or whether the behavior is subjectively normative. Sorry. messed up there. Now, so let's say, negative attitude, negative attitude, negative attitude. Worked long and hard to be a positive guy. Negative attitude. All right, my fellow nerds may rail me on this, but there's an X-Men character named Cyclops. Don't have a positive view of him. Well, he has had, at least once I think, a comic book devoted to him, right? Well, if it was subjectively normative among my fellow nerds to buy that book, then my negative attitude towards that book would predict my behavior of buying the book less than if it was subjectively not normative to buy the book. So you see how when the subjective normativity is incongruent with the attitude, then the attitude doesn't predict the behavior as well. But when the subjective normativity is congruent with the attitude, then the attitude predicts the behavior better. All right? All right, guys. Now, the last thing I want to mention is that even though I've discussed both of these things kind of in isolation, how perceived control affects the relationship between an attitude and a behavior, and how subjective normativity of the behavior predicts the behavior between an attitude and a behavior, even though I've talked about them in isolation, they all work together, all right? So you may have high perceived control, but if the subjective normativity is inconsistent, if the subjective normativity of the behavior is inconsistent with your attitude, then chances are you're still, even though your control is high, you're still probably not going to buy or engage in that behavior. All right. But if everything lines up, you believe you have a lot of control, the behavior is subjectively normative. If the subjective normativity of the behavior is consistent with your attitude, then then the attitude is probably really going to predict that behavior. But if you don't think you have control and the attitude is inconsistent with the subjective normativity of the behavior, then the attitude probably won't at all predict the behavior. So again, you can kind of see how the theory of planned behavior came out of the idea, or out of that crisis. When do attitudes actually predict behavior? Well, it depends. And the theory of planned behavior gives you at least two variables upon which it depends. All right. When do attitudes predict behavior? Well, it depends on whether or not you think you have control, and whether or not the behavior is subjectively normative, and the combination of the two. All right. All right, guys, that's it for this video on the theory of planned behavior. As always, if you have any questions, please send them my way. If not, I'll see you later.